Hello and welcome to week 3, lesson 12 for ELA grade 12. I'll be walking you through the distance learning lesson for the day. I'll start with an overview of the materials that you'll need for the lesson. Then I'll talk to you about the learning that we'll do today. I'll give you a quick model of some of the annotations that you'll be making and some of the thinking that you'll be doing while you're reading. And then I'll end by previewing the upcoming lesson for you. Let's start like we usually do with our riddle of the day. Um, what gets wet while drying? This one might be a little tricky. It's short, but it might be tricky. What gets wet while drying? Think about that a little bit more if you need to, and go ahead and pause the video if you want to, because I am about to show you the answer. A towel. So a towel gets wet while it's drying. Okay, so just a little something to get our wheels spinning. We are on lesson 12 today, which is on page 45 of your lesson packet. So go ahead and make sure you have that available to you. You'll also need your note catcher, which is on page 46, and of course you'll need something to write with. We're going to continue today reading our text, Back to My Own Country, an essay, and today you will be focusing on pages 38 and 39. So before moving on, just make sure you have access to all of those lesson materials. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to continue reading. We're going to continue our first read and our close read. We're kind of combining those two as we go through the essay together. And the reason we're reading this, just as a quick reminder, is to give us a first-hand account of how British colonialism complicated the idea of home. And our guiding questions that we'll want to keep in mind today are similar to the ones for the past few lessons, and they are: how did British colonialism complicate the idea of home? And what does it mean to call a place home? Here's our learning target for today. Let's read it together. I can write an objective summary of key paragraphs in a text. So today, after doing your first and close reads of some key paragraphs, I'll ask you to write a summary, and I'll go over what's included in a strong summary before you get started with that. Okay, so like I mentioned, today you'll be reading paragraphs 31 through 33, and since this is your first time reading those paragraphs, you'll be using your usual first reading annotation routine. So specifically, as you read, I want you to annotate the passage by underlining words, phrases, or sentences that stand out to you, drawing a box around any unfamiliar words or phrases, and writing down any reactions you have in the margins of the text. You can pause the video to do your first reading now. Okay, now that you've done your first reading of those paragraphs, we're going to go back and reread a certain section to do a close reading of that paragraph. And the paragraph we're focusing on today is paragraph 33. So as you go back to read that paragraph, your task will be to mark details that describe the legacies that the Caribbean and Britain have left for each other. Before you get started, I'll show you a model. So as I was reading this paragraph, paragraph 33, I underlined the words here. I'll read these sentences to you. In the Caribbean, the legacy is, in one sense, everything. Not just the towns, the cities, and the landscape, but the very people themselves, their origins, their ethnic mix, their hybrid cultures. All result from what the British did on those islands before they finally left them. So I underlined these sentences because here the author is telling us what the legacy was that the British left on the Caribbean. They were there for many years, as we've learned throughout the rest of the essay, And here we're talking about the legacy of what they left. So basically, after the British left the Caribbean, what parts of British life are still in the Caribbean? When we go to the Caribbean, what might remind us of Britain, or what might remind us of the British people? And here the author is telling us that Britain's legacy in the Caribbean is, in a sense, everything. And by everything, she actually means she's saying the cities, the landscape, the people, everything has been influenced by British culture, possibly because they were there for so many years, or possibly because they really infiltrated themselves into the Caribbean society. Basically, Britain left a lasting impression on Caribbean life. So again, this is one part that I underlined and annotated when I was doing my close reading. There are other examples of the legacy that Britain left in the Caribbean that I'd like you to go back and underline and find in that paragraph. And you're also going to find in the bottom part of the paragraph, the author is talking about the legacy that the Caribbean may have left on Britain. So how was Britain impacted by its history in the Caribbean? And you can find that in the latter half of the paragraph. So now I'm going to give you a chance to pause the video and do that close reading of paragraph 33 now. And now that we're back, we have done our close reading and we're going to move on to the thinking part of our lesson. And for today, I'd like you to think about the following question. What are the differences between the legacies the two countries have left for each other? So go ahead and pause the video and think about that now. And welcome back. And now that you've done some thinking about that key question, I'll tell you a little bit about what I was thinking about. So as I was thinking about this question, I went back to my annotations. The things that the author lists about the Caribbean's legacy on the British seem to be, at first glance, more abstract than the British's legacy in the Caribbean. So for that, I mean, in the Caribbean, the British influenced things such as how cities were designed, how different neighborhoods looked, and since some British colonists married people who lived in the Caribbean, they also influenced the structure and culture of families in the Caribbean. So those are very concrete things. In Britain, though, the Caribbean influence was not on specific things, or at least that's not what the author is describing here. The author seems to be talking more about identity and attitudes. So because Britain colonized the Caribbean, they were able to grow their empire and they see themselves as a world power. Another impact of colonizing the Caribbean is the attitude that Britons have towards race. So those are two abstract ideas. So I identified that and I was thinking about the difference between the two legacies that the countries left on each other. Now it's time to discuss the text, and this relates to the thinking and the annotating that you just did. So with a family member, caregiver, or friend, talk about what you think Stuart Hall meant when he said, "The very notion of Great Britain's greatness is bound up with empire." The very notion of Great Britain's greatness is bound up with empire. By empire, he's talking about the British Empire, which means all of the countries that Britain colonized during the time period of British colonialism. So use that information to think about this question and then have a conversation with a family member, caregiver, or friend about this question. Go ahead and pause the video and take some time to do that now. Okay, now that you've had your discussion time, it's time to finish our lesson with our daily writing. And today you'll be writing a summary. And specifically, I'd like you to summarize paragraph 33 of the text. So this is the text that you've already marked up today, that you've done some thinking and talking about. So you're probably very familiar with it by now. So go ahead, um, On your note catcher, summarize paragraph 33. Remember that a summary is a concise and objective overview of the text. And when you're done, I'd like you to share your summary with someone. Just to preview what's coming next, in our next lesson, we will finish reading the text, we'll continue with our annotations, and we'll finish answering some questions as well. If you have questions about this particular lesson, feel free to email your teacher for support using the email format shown on the screen here. And thank you so much for learning with me today. I look forward to teaching you again soon. Just a few reminders to close this out. First, don't forget to talk about your lesson with someone. Also, please don't forget to read for 20 minutes and complete a reading log entry. And then finally, practice your reading fluency using the first or second page of your weekly reading. Thanks again, and I'll see you again soon.